Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is the first Hunter build of Season 22. Sorry for the delay, had some other priorities come up, but I wanted to share this build with you because it's one of my favorite that I've made recently, and it's something that's perfectly fitted for endgame content. The brief highlights of the build include some high damage and high utility grenades that pair perfectly with our subclass, allowing us to have a ton of unraveling tangling effects that not only means some very low commitment and high AoE damage, but also a lot of ease of use and success in endgame content. On top of that, we have some great survivability and ability loops crafted directly into the build. Before we get into it, be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and let me know what you thought of the build down below, as well as recommendations for future builds. Getting right into the subclass then, for your abilities, we're mainly going with Marksman's Dodge. We don't really need Gambler's Dodge because our melee can technically be infinite as long as we time it correctly, and because of the lower cooldown, it allows us to spec into our abilities and the ability loop we're going to be going over a lot easier. The Marksman Dodge is the way to go. In addition, we are also going with Grapple Grenade. The only reason we're using Grapple Grenade is because of its cooldown. Due to our exotic, our intrinsic grenade is going to be replaced with Mothkeeper's Wraps effect by spawning in the Arc and Void Moth grenades. Because of this, our Grapple Grenade, our Threadling Grenade, or our Shackle Grenade are all going to be replaced by that anyway, so we're going with the one with the lowest cooldown. For aspects, the primary one we're focusing on is Whirling Maelstrom. In short, whenever you destroy a tangle, it will weave a writhing mass of strand fibers that seeks out enemies and deals unraveling damage. This is a fantastic AoE and low commitment damage option that simply you just destroy a tangle with and it goes off and does its thing. The nice thing about this is it can proc additional effects that I'll cover later in the video, but again, it's completely autonomous. You don't need to worry about actually guiding it or directing it anywhere. You simply break a tangle or throw a tangle and it'll just do its thing. For our other aspect, I'm going with Threaded Spectre. You can go with Widow's Silk instead, but I'm briefly going to go over Threaded Spectre and why I personally choose it over Widow's Silk. In short, whenever you activate your class ability, it leaves behind a Strand decoy that draws the attention of nearby adds, working almost like a pseudo invis where it breaks any aggro from nearby enemies. And after taking significant damage or when enemies get close enough to it, it detonates, dealing some AoE damage and spawns a few Threadlings that'll seek out enemies and deal additional damage. This is fantastic for survivability, and it's a nice sort of get out of jail free card because if any enemies rush you down, like an unstoppable champion for instance, you can just simply pop this and the champion will focus all of its attention on the decoy and it'll break aggro from you. You can use Widow's Silk like I mentioned earlier, and what this will do is bring your total grenade charge from 2 to 3. I just feel that Threaded Spectre offers a lot more utility with it, but again, either truly works with this build. Onto the fragments then. The first one is going to be Thread of Transmutation, which while you have Woven Mail, Weapon Final Blows can create a tangle. This adds another avenue for us to spawn tangles, not necessarily spawn multiple ones at the same time, and this just simply allows us to have greater consistency between spawns. We're also pairing this with Thread of Isolation, and the main reason behind this is to spawn, again, more tangles. Because as you can see in the description, with a tangle, anytime that you defeat a stranded debuff target, it will unwind them and create a tangle. So again, these are just both options that allow us to generate tangles very easily without necessarily having to commit to having Woven Mail or using a strand-specific weapon. On top of this, we're using Thread of Warding to give us Woven Mail every time we pick up an Orb of Power. And again, Woven Mail is a 60% damage resist for 10 seconds, so it greatly increases our survivability. Then finally, we have Thread of Generation, which anytime we deal damage, it gives us grenade energy. For those that are wondering, this does work with Whirling Maelstrom, meaning that we can get grenade energy just by breaking tangles and spawning these Maelstrom effects, or throwing tangles at enemies and spawning these Maelstrom effects, and as they deal AoE damage over time, it'll slowly regen our grenade energy. In case you don't want to use any of these fragments though, some alternatives include stuff like Thread of Ascent, which allows any of our grenade ability activations to reload our weapon and also briefly increase the handling and airborne effectiveness. This really isn't required with this build, and it's why I say it's an alternative if you don't want to use anything else for whatever reason. However, if you wanted to, you could also use Thread of Continuity, and this will increase the duration of the unraveling and severing effects that we can apply with this build. Briefly going over the artifact mods for this build, the first ones are going to include Origin Perk Specialization 1 and 2. In short, any weapon with the origin traits listed here are not only going to have their origin trait effects improved, but will be overcharged whenever applicable in an activity, which is again a free 25% damage boost. On top of that, I'm also going with Void Strand Siphon. This will allow our Void and Strand weapons to spawn Orbs of Power after getting a few kills. You can always swap this out depending on what weapons you want to use, and I'll go over some recommendations towards the end of the video. I'm also going with Anatonic Tangles, and just simply allows our Strand weapon to generate tangles after getting a few kills. I'm also using Elemental Fury, which allows any stunned champion to take bonus damage from our abilities or Elemental Orb damage. We're also pairing this with Refreshing Pickups, which anytime you pick up a Tangle or an Elemental Orb, it grants you energy to your least powered ability. Another artifact mod you can use with this build, but don't have to depending on what weapons you want to go with, is Semi-Auto Striker. In short, whenever you have fewer than 2 stacks of armor charge, any rapid precision shots with bows, snipers, scout rifles will generate you a stack of armor charge, and something like this does work with stacks on stacks, meaning that you can get 2 stacks of armor charge just for hitting 5 crits with the scout rifle. On top of that, I'm going with Rapid Fire Ranger, which anytime you get rapid precision hits against long distance combatants, you'll have a 15% debuff applied to them for a short time. This just overall again increases our damage to them. And then finally we have elemental munitions, which anytime you defeat a combatant with a tangle, they have a chance of dropping special and heavy ammo. Getting right into the armor and the mods for today. Starting off on our helmet, we have heavy ammo finder, which will just increase the drop chance of heavy ammo on kill. Pairing this with Void and Strand Dual Siphon to benefit our primary Strand weapon as well as our heavy weapon. Again, fit this out however you want to support the weapons that you use with this build. And I'm also using Ashes to Assets just to get us increased super energy on grenade kills, as we're going to be throwing a ton of grenades with this build. Getting into the gauntlets and our exotic for today is Moth Keeper's Wraps. Moth Keepers is one of the most interesting hunter exotics that's been recently added to Destiny 2, and has a lot of versatility and a wide range of playstyles you can adopt with it because it works on literally any subclass. In short, what it does is, depending on where you throw a grenade, it'll spawn two moths that have two different effects it can have. The first is a blinding moth, which will seek out enemies and deal a ton of damage as well as blinding them, which means that this does have staggering potential for unstoppable champions. And the other moth is a void moth that will seek out you or an ally and give you 50% of a void overshield for 10 seconds. And depending on where you throw this grenade, it can either spawn two blinding moths, two void moths, or one of each. As far as the mods we're actually using on our gauntlets, I'm using Grenade Kickstart, which will consume all our stacks of armor charge and grant us increasing grenade energy back for the more stacks that we have. With this build, we can hold up to 4 stacks of armor charge, and with 1 stack of Grenade Kickstart, this will return around 35% of our total grenade energy every time we throw a grenade, as long as we have maximum stacks. I'm also pairing this with Bolstering Detonation, which simply causing damage with our grenade will grant us class ability energy, allowing us to have a little bit of a loop, building our class ability back and then using our class ability to give us grenade energy back. I'm also pairing this with Firepower, which allows our grenade final blows to generate us orbs of power. For a chest piece, it's really up to you however you want to build this. You can always do something like a reserve mod or a resistance mod based on the activity you're doing. I would recommend at least having 1 stack of charged up, just so you can increase the number of armor charge stacks you can actually carry, and therefore increase the benefit of Grenade Kickstart. But again, fit this out however you wish. Multiple reserves, multiple resists, whatever you feel is best. Onto our boots, the first mod is Stacks on Stacks, which I mentioned earlier, will allow our armor charge to get an additional armor charge stack every time we pick up an orb of power, meaning that we get 2 stacks of armor charge when we would normally get 1. We're also pairing this with Elemental Charge, which with this build, whenever you destroy a Strand Tangle, it has an escalating chance to give you a stack of armor charge. And whenever this armor charge is granted to you, you'll get an additional one because of Stacks on Stacks. Comparing this with Recuperation, which gives us some intrinsic health regen that this build typically misses on Strand, and this allows us to get a little bit of health back every time we pick up an Orb of Power. For our Cloak, the first one I'm using is Bomber, and this just allows us to get a little bit of grenade energy back every time we use our class ability, which means that our grenade and class ability are intrinsically linked and help with each other's regen. I'm also pairing this with Reaper, just so whenever we do use our class ability, our next final weapon blow is guaranteed to generate an Orb of Power, and pairing this with Powerful Attraction, any nearby Orbs of Power are picked up whenever we activate our class ability. Again, this class ability not only activates all these other effects that I just went over, but also allows us to deploy that decoy, which can then enable us to just get to better positioning and benefit from any Orbs of Power we just picked up by activating our class ability. As far as the weapons go for this build, there's a lot of different weapons that you can use with this, and I'll give you a ton of recommendations just because this build is incredibly customizable if you ever want to change any aspect of it. The first one I'm recommending is Quicksilver Storm. This auto rifle has a ton of benefits for it. Recently, with its catalyst granting it the effect of being a strand weapon, it has a ton of synergy with this build. And with its Grenade Chaser perk, it allows it to store up to 3 grenade launcher shots that you intrinsically can just swap to with an all firing mode, and these deal a ton of damage, even in stuff like Master and Grandmaster content. Pairing this with its Catalyst, it allows any enemies that are defeated by this to create tangles, which is again another avenue to ensure that we're generating as many tangles as we possibly can. Besides Quicksilver though, you can really use any other strand weapon. A popular one, specifically a competitor with Quicksilver Storm itself, is Rufus's Fury. I have mine with Demo and Hatchling. You can roll it with pretty much anything else. But in general, anything with Demolitionist or Adrenaline Junkie, for example, works fantastic with this build. Like I mentioned earlier, and specifically for higher difficulty content, you can also use Scout Rifles to really good extents with this build, especially when combined with stuff like Semi-Auto Striker, Rapid Fire Ranger, and our intrinsic severing that's granted to us through Threat of Isolation. This means that not only will landing precision hits sever an enemy, which after killing them can help us spawn more tangles, but it also grants us a few stacks of armor charge intrinsically, and also allows us to put a 15% debuff on that enemy. For the legendary options, the first one is going to be Hung Jury. The main reason behind this is that it can roll with Shoot to Loot, which allows us to pick up any ammo bricks as well as orbs of power that we're generating with this build. And on top of it, you can roll Shoot to Loot with Kinetic Tremors, and anytime Kinetic Tremors is activated, not only is it dealing some nice AoE damage that complements the other AoE aspects of this build, but any orbs of power that Kinetic Tremors actually comes into contact with will actually be picked up thanks to Shoot to Loot. And this is a fantastic perk that allows for a lot better quality of life with this build. The other one, of course, is Fang of Yut, which is the Strand scout rifle available from the Crota's End raid. This one can also roll with shoot to loot, and I would personally pair it with something like Hatchling or maybe Kill Clip. For exotic alternatives though, you can also go with Dead Man's Tail. This is mainly because it's craftable starting this season, and one of the things it can roll with is shoot to loot. And just like all other scout rifles with shoot to loot, you can pick up orbs of power from a distance, and simply using this weapon allows you to not only apply severing and a debuff, but also just get free stacks of armor charge. Plus, whenever you pair this with Dead Man's Tail's perk Cranial Spike, it allows this weapon to get progressively stacking damage as you land crits, as well as the increased rate of fire, range, and target acquisition. And again, pairing this with the intrinsic severing, armor charge generating, and weakening effects that just simply come about by hitting multiple crits, it allows for a very passive, long-distance playstyle that works extremely well in Grandmaster content. Again, I personally prefer to use Quicksilver Storm just because I find such passive gameplay a little bit boring personally, but this is very potent in Grandmaster content or just high difficulty content, where you're prioritizing staying alive and playing a very safe playstyle rather than being aggressive trying to get it done as fast as you can. As far as other weapons go, again, any Strand weapon works perfectly fine with this build, and any weapon with Demolitionist especially works well. I personally have the Corrective Measure, which is the Vault of Glass LMG. I have mine with Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie, which I feel is a fantastic weapon roll to pair with this build. For your special weapon, again, it's more or less the same deal. You can really use anything that's being benefited by perk orbs and specialization. You can use anything you just personally enjoy using with this build. Specifically, if you're going with legendary alternatives in your kinetic and your power slot, you can always go with stuff like Dead Messenger, which is craftable and can also roll with Demolitionist this season. But with that in mind, as long as your weapon can generate orbs of power in some way, or generate Euclidate energy through something like Demolitionist, or it's just benefiting from any other mods you might be using, it works perfectly fine. Again, this build is incredibly adaptable, and you don't just need to use Strand weapons to generate these tangles. Like I mentioned, this is one of my favorite hunter builds I've made recently because it's just so creative. We're taking Mothkeeper's Wraps and using it with a subclass that it really shouldn't work too well with, and it actually works perfectly. Thanks to Mothkeepers as well as Boiling Maelstrom, again, we have a ton of low commitment, high AoE damage that also has a ton of utility behind it. Pairing this with weapons that have Demolitionist or just really good ad clearing potential with Strand weapons, and we have a monster of a build that works in basically all levels of content, up to and including stuff like Grandmaster content. Again, if you don't want to use something like Quicksilver Storm and have access to the Alt-Fire Grenade Launcher, any scout rifle, especially with shoot to loot, works just fine. Again, Hung Jury, Fang of Yurt, and Dead Messenger are my three go-to, but really any that you enjoy using works just fine. But no matter what you do with this build and how you customize it to your playstyle, it's one that is going to thrive in endgame content, and I'm sure it's one you're going to love using. Once again, thank you guys so much for your support on these videos. I greatly appreciate it. I have a Warlock build coming out very soon, so stay tuned for that. And let me know what you thought of this build down in the comments below, as well as any recommendations you might have for future videos. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content here today, as again, I do make periodic build guides for every season in Destiny 2. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate your support in these videos. And as always, have a great day.